wow. That was the reaction that I was left with after today's Apple event. It was so packed. Like last year's event, I hated it so much, mostly because of the fact that it was a little bit of minor upgrades, except for like the only thing that I was actually excited last year was for the iPhone 12 mini. But this year, this thing just got a whole lot better. The Apple event was so good this year. Let's talk about it. So let's start off with the iPad mini because this thing was the most that I got excited for. So first up with the iPad mini is that yes, it got a new redesign just like the iPad Air and all of that, with like Touch ID actually integrated, like bump, so that's fine. But it went from 7.6 inches to 8.3 inches, which is somewhat of a big deal considering that it's still pocketable and it's still that same iPad mini form factor. And finally, they brought USB-C in. I'm so happy for that. And like no longer do we have all of those like crummy iPad, like big fat iPhone 6 bezels. Now it's like a nice, actual good spec bump. And speaking of spec bumps, we've also had like the normal iPad, which always gets a spec bump every year. And finally, Apple actually brought in center stage onto all iPads. I think it's not there on the iPad Air, but every iPad, almost every iPad on the iPad line now has center stage, even the base normal one. So I'm really happy for like the iPad mini, especially mostly because of the fact that it's like a bigger and a better screen right now with like, I don't know, around 500 nits of brightness. And also the fact that I also got a spec bump with like the A15 Bionic, and the normal iPad actually got a spec bump to the A13 Bionic. But still, nonetheless, everything is good. You've got Touch ID, and then you've got a better spec bump, and like you've got a bigger screen on the normal iPad mini, which I'm all grateful for. And like, it was more of like a sensible option than just like updating like the normal iPads. So there's always like the normal iPad, there's like the new iPad mini, and yes, the prices have been raised. For the normal iPad, it's been raised a little bit, while for the mini, $100. I think it's $100 more, at least in the Malaysia. But so the next part is, of course, everybody's been wanting Apple Watch Series 7. So this is not a big thing, and I'm not going to be covering all of the software stuff, like for example, Apple Fitness, but this one isn't that big of a thing. This is just like Apple Watch 7. It has like a slightly curved display, and it has a bigger display, and Apple put a lot of emphasis on durability and like water resistance, especially this year. So it's all of like the same thing that the Apple Watch Series 6 does. There's no Apple Watch SE 2, which isn't a big surprise considering that the SE stuff actually gets updated like once in 3 or 2 years. So there's all of that. And let's all move this away because we know what you're excited for. We know why you're here. iPhone 13. So the iPhone 13, although I thought it was gonna be like a minute, like a little bit of a spec bump and a little bit of here and there features, it was actually power packed. So starting off with the iPhone 13 and iPhone 13 mini, this year's emphasis, except for 5G, was battery. And iPhone 13 is the only iPhone that I think that Apple actually listened to us properly, because they delivered what we all have been wanted for like a lot of years, except for USB-C and more customization, because we all know Apple doesn't do that. So starting off with the iPhone 13 and 13 mini, they finally have like a little bit of a bigger sensor. And you know that sensor shift technology on the iPhone 12 Pro Max? Well, they brought it down to all of the iPhones this year, so that's a big plus. And they're also like claiming somewhat of like the iPhone 12 mini and to the iPhone 13 mini, you'll have like 1.5 hours extra screen time, extra battery life. Or like for the 12 and the 13, you'll have like an extra 2.5 hours of battery life. But we know we'll get the battery specs soon. So all of that out of the way, what is actually new about these? Apple is actually putting a lot of emphasis not just on battery, but also on the cameras. So yes, I just said like the cameras have a bigger, wider aperture, as well as the fact that they have a little bit of bigger sensor shifts, and like the sensor shift technology from the iPhone 12 Pro Max is there like throughout the iPhone 13 line. And added to that, they're actually bringing in cinematic mode, which is somewhat of like a pro mode on iPhones maybe. That's actually like, it actually helps in a lot of things, actually whatever they said over there. It's kind of like how you actually can like change focuses after shooting the stuff with like Dolby Vision on the Pros. And speaking of the Pros have also like gotten more professional, mostly because of the fact that both the ultra wide and the wide have actually had a bigger sensor, and that's why the sensors look a bit uneven this year. So Apple's kind of claiming like 92% more light bringing into the sensor because of the fact that they've actually made the sensor big. So we have to actually test that when I actually get the phones, which I would be getting as usual. So I'm just going to be doing the talking over here. And so last year the telephoto cameras maxed out to 2.5x on the iPhone 12 Pro Max, but this year both the 13 Pro and the 13 Pro Max both feature 3 times telephoto cameras, which is a good spec bump. And also like this year they're bringing in the 1TB option for the Pros finally, and a lot of people have actually been rumoring that. And also like the base storage for both the models, the 13 as well as like the Pros, all of them have actually like doubled from 64 gigabytes to 128. Finally, Apple, finally, and they haven't really raised the prices that much, at least in USD, and they all start from $700, the normal. And the biggest thing that we've all been asking ever since iPhone 10 is the reduction of the notch, which they finally did. Like, now it just looks a lot more cleaner, and you know that iPhone 14 video which I just did, linked up over here. And if you saw the punch hole stuff, I'm really waiting for these to become into punch holes. And finally, iPhone 13 Pros, only the Pros for this year for some reason, have ProMotion, which means 120 Hertz. And they finally brought that. Like, people have been asking for decades for Apple to include ProMotion on their phones. And so like this iPhone 13 event was a celebration of joy, mostly because of the fact that whatever people ask, except for like USB-C and like all of the other stuff, they brought most of the stuff that people asked for. Apple finally listened. And I'm really happy for this. As you guys followed on this, thank you guys for watching this video. Comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Until then, this is yours truly, Shreyas Kalyan.